Welcome to another Bad Cop No Donut Deep Dive. On today's video, we'll be looking at the Aurora Police Department in Colorado. These murder pigs, as I would call them, have shown us over a period of years that they are both dangerous in terms of police brutality and just straight up murdering citizens. And even when they unjustly murder citizens, and even when there's national outrage for those particular incidents, you'll have police officers mocking and making fun of the very people that they murdered. That police department has shown us a consistent pattern of having an almost bloodlust towards citizens by exposing them to abuse, beatings, and even death. So sit back, grab your favorite drink, and let's take a deep dive into the giant pile of disgusting, inexcusable, and downright criminal murder pig behavior from the Aurora Police Department. Wikipedia can sometimes list incorrect information. However, when I open a police department's Wikipedia page and the first thing that I see is that the department has been embroiled in numerous scandals related to police misconduct, well, that tells me there might be a bit of a problem. The Aurora Police Department employs 744 officers and 237 civilians with an annual budget of $129 million. And their motto is, quote, to make Aurora safer every day, end quote. Now, many citizens who came to me about this particular police department have pretty much said that these cops could make the streets a lot safer by simply retiring. Let me show you what I mean by that. The way that you know there is racism being displayed from the police in Aurora, Colorado is that it's very, very difficult for a black person to even be hired as a cop with that department. And there was a study that was conducted that demonstrated this. Despite the fact that black people make up 16% of the total population in that city, less than 5% are police officers, and some people are beginning to become a little bit suspicious about that. Let's have a listen.
Numbers released last week to the Aurora City Council show that white applicants to the Aurora Police Department since 2018 are over 3 times more likely to be hired than black applicants. And despite making up roughly 16% of the city's population, only 4% of officers entering the police department in 2018 were black. Leadership at the Aurora Police Department agree.
It's been a long-term systemic issue.
Back on March 2nd, 2015, the Aurora Police Department served an arrest warrant on the Carter-Vinzant. He was on parole at the time, and officers claimed that they feared for their safety and they thought he was going to shoot at them. The problem with that is that this man was unarmed.
New at 11, an Aurora police officer has just been cleared in a deadly shooting. Officer Paul Giroth fired the shot that killed Nishilas Carter-Vinzant back in March. The officer was serving a warrant for a parole violation. Giroth says based on the suspect's long criminal history, he thought that he was about to fire at police. Vincent was unarmed.
Well, the end result of that case was that Aurora paid out $2.6 million in a settlement to this man's family, and the police department agreed to make several changes to improve oversight of officer conduct. That wasn't the only murder pig incident in 2015. On June 29, 2015, Jeffrey Gale, who was near the corner of East Colorado Avenue and South Havana Street, was accused of pickpocketing. So 7 Aurora police officers surrounded him, got him face down on the ground, handcuffed and hogtied this man, and then just began tasering him over and over and over again, despite the fact that he was face down, handcuffed, and hogtied. And then on November 14th, 2015, Dwight Cruz, who is a 60-year-old disabled man, was removed from his home in the middle of the night without a warrant, was physically injured, and unlawfully arrested by the Aurora Police Department. The ACLU filed a lawsuit on Dwight Cruz's behalf in November of 2017. And here's a little background. Aurora Police went to Dwight Cruz's home at around 2 a.m. This is about 2 hours after Dwight Cruz intervened to stop his stepdaughter from being physically abused by her husband. Now, mind you, these police officers had no warrant when they showed up to Dwight Cruz's home. They banged on his door loudly, and mind you, it's a 60-year-old man. They flashed lights in his windows, and when he didn't come out, they would threaten to break into his home. So Dwight Cruz came to his door, and then the officers asked him to step onto the porch. Dwight Cruz is also a pet owner. He owns a little cat. While he's being patted down, his cat got out of the house. So when Dwight Cruz saw his cat running, he pointed and said, "My cat's outside." And then out of nowhere, one of the officers decided to just throw Dwight Cruz onto the ground, and his body landed on jagged rock.
You're gonna get a warrant for your arrest if you don't come down here and resolve this.
Cruz's son opens the door. He's right behind him, and without any information about why they are there, he agrees to come outside.
They don't have the right to do that because they were essentially arresting him, and to arrest him inside his home, they need a warrant.
While being patted down, Cruz tells officers his cat is escaping from inside the home.
My cat's outside. Stop. Your cat's been outside the whole time.
Archie! No, he has not.
I pointed and says, "Can I get my cat?" Something like that. And that's when I was thrown to the ground.
Charges of resisting arrest were ultimately dismissed by a judge.
Also in 2015, Ozada Williams, who is a black woman, was driving her boyfriend to a hospital one night because her boyfriend had been shot. While at the hospital, she dropped her keys on the ground, and an officer who was once praised for heroism decided to stomp on her and beat her up. And what makes this ironic is that one of the officers involved, who was Sergeant Michael Hawkins, was lauded as a hero during the shooting at the Aurora Theater that was perpetrated by James Holmes. So one would think that if a citizen is driving another citizen to the hospital due to a gunshot wound, that these officers would have some mercy. But as I always say on this channel, murder pigs are gonna murder pig. And here's a story for all the people who say, well, if you just comply, nothing will happen to you. And if you've done nothing wrong, then the police won't bother you. Well, the story of Darson Kelly on February 19th, 2016 proves those assertions to be highly incorrect. You see, Darson was near a scene of a crime on that night. And despite the fact that he did not resist arrest, the police still tased him. And the way that you know that this whole thing was totally illegal from beginning to end was that this man was paid $110,000 in an out-of-court settlement. Let that sink in for a moment. All they did was illegally arrest this man and tase him. That happens quite often, and people don't get paid $110,000 for it, which lets you know that had Darson Kelly pushed this any further, he would have gotten paid a lot more than what he got paid. Let's roll the tape.
Sit down. Sit down.
I also cannot sit. You can sit down.
Sit down, please.
Do me a favor, turn around. Both of you face that direction right now.
For what?
Turn around.
For what?
Face that direction.
For
Put
what?
hands on your head.
For what? No, I know my rights. For what?
I'm asking you to do
For
that.
what? What are we being detained for? Answer my question, officer.
No, we're not
I know my
talking.
rights.
Stay there. Cuff him. Hold on, I got it. 5, give us the air for a second. We have one tased. Take him into custody. Just stay right where you are.
Keep an eye on that, please. I don't know if it's police.
Okay, slow down. Do it right. There you go.
And the incidents with people of color doesn't end there for 2016. For example, on March 16, 2016, Aurora police officers enter a coffee shop. And at that coffee shop, Omar Hassan was just minding his own business and eating a muffin. The officers put their hands on their guns and demanded that Omar Hassan leave the coffee shop, with one of the officers saying, quote, "Your kind of business is not welcome here," end quote. It would appear that the only reason why this man was asked to leave the coffee shop and the only reason why these cops were so aggressive towards him was that he was black and he was wearing a hoodie. Being black and wearing a hoodie hasn't worked out for all of us. Let's just keep it a buck here. On June 26, 2016, Aurora police officers John Gonzalez and Daryl Huntsman responded to a welfare check because there were reports of a suicidal woman. They went into the wrong home, and the person who answered the door told Officer Huntsman that there was no woman in distress at the home. Officer Gonzalez then stated stated that he would still enter the home because he had a warrant, but the problem with that is he didn't have a warrant. Gonzalez then got into a physical altercation with a citizen, and when Huntsman heard the commotion, he then handcuffed the citizen. Another citizen tried to stop Officer Gonzalez from illegally entering the home. That person too was put in handcuffs. Officer Gonzalez did not report the incident. He faced almost no punishment because he only got a 24-hour unpaid suspension, meaning a one-day suspension for illegally entering a home, putting people in handcuffs, and then not reporting the incident. This was all confirmed by a body-worn camera. Gonzalez actually tried to appeal his punishment of just a one-day suspension, but Vanessa Wilson, who is the chief of Aurora Police, said that Gonzalez was, quote, lying to that citizen, end quote, and that it was, quote, APD's mistake 100%. We violated those people's rights that evening, end quote. And it's gotta be really, really embarrassing to keep having cops who were once considered heroes during the Aurora theater shooting, like John Gonzalez, who turns out to be murder pigs. And sometimes the racism is a little bit more on the nose. Like, for example, on June 18th, 2017, Lieutenant Charles DeShauser was actually recorded referring to black people as, quote, Alabama porch monkeys, end quote. As you might imagine, some people had some issues with that. Let's roll the tape.
It's June of 2017. Denver police shot a suspect who ran from them into Aurora. While sorting things out, Aurora Police Lieutenant Chuck DeShazer says this about the heated neighbors. We're only playing it once.
We got the Alabama porch monkeys all contained.
The officer he's talking to quickly turns the camera off. Chief Nick Metz saw the video and responded immediately.
Now that was the previous chief of Aurora Police, Chief Metz. And I would only give Chief Metz credit for firing DeShauser when he had the chance. Only if there weren't other incidents that DeShauser should have been fired for that were more than a decade old. Let me show you what I mean by that. According to this Fox 31 news report, DeShauser had a bit of a troubled history. In 2008, the city paid out a $175,000 settlement because of DeShauser's conduct in the calendar year of 2006. And it would appear that the Alabama porch monkeys comment was not the first racist thing that this guy has said in public as a police officer. Here's the story of Laurie McCorrick Rice. Rice was 62 years old and had an oxygen machine. Rice encountered DeShauser at a King Soopers grocery store. DeShauser was working as an off-duty security guard. DeShauser approached Rice and accused her of parking illegally in a handicapped spot, even though she had a handicapped placard in her car and uses a portable oxygen machine. And that oxygen machine was clearly visible. DeShauser made the following comment. DeShauser said, quote, "Can you believe these effing N-words," end quote. Rice said that she immediately went to the store manager and then she wanted to go home. Surveillance video from the store shows DeShauser pull up near Rice in an unmarked vehicle and then pulled her over. He then ordered her and her 12-year-old daughter, Cassidy, out of the car. Miss Rice said, quote, "The first thing he did to Cassidy was slap her in the face. She starts crying. He then said, 'Shut the F up.' He starts to choke her, knocks her onto the ground and starts kicking her," end quote. Cassidy Tate, the woman who was being abused by DeShauser, said, quote, "I still have post-traumatic stress from that night," end quote. And she is now a grown adult with 2 daughters. Despite the fact that she's in an arm cast in that picture, DeShauser was not demoted or fired. Instead, he was soon promoted to lieutenant, and that's even after the settlement.
The commission acknowledged the comment was offensive. They also acknowledged that he has been written up 3 times previously, once for making sexually offensive comments. But ultimately, when they looked at similar violations by other officers, which didn't result in a firing, they felt termination was too much.
And that, dear audience, is what we call the thin blue line. It's when officers protect themselves and their peers, no matter what themselves or those peers happen to have done. Another good example of that is Officer Nate Meyer. In March 2019, this officer was found in his police vehicle in full uniform, gun, badge, taser, all that stuff, but he was sound asleep behind the wheel. A blood test showed that he was at least 5 times the legal limit of alcohol. Other officers showed up and they immediately turned off their body cameras, did not test a clear bottle of liquid that was found in the car, and so you might have guessed they certainly didn't collect the evidence at the scene, because if they did, it could have resulted in a criminal prosecution. Even after that incident was known, Officer Meyer was not fired, he was just demoted, but he kept his job.
The driver, Officer Nate Meyer, was not injured. He was drunk, on duty, in his patrol car, and armed.
I wasn't sure if it was alcohol, but I knew it was some kind of something.
Newly released police reports show multiple officers reported smelling alcohol on Meyer upon entering the car. He was taken to the hospital, but no arrest, no DUI, and he's still on duty. In a statement on Facebook, the Aurora Police Department defended that decision, saying in part, due to an inability to exclude a medical condition and absent confirmatory information, a DUI investigation was not conducted.
Now, this incident you might have heard of. Elijah Jovan McClain was just 23 years old, and he was a black man who was a massage therapist from Aurora, Colorado. On August 24, 2019, a citizen called the Aurora Police Department claiming that McClain was wearing a ski mask and looked, quote, sketchy, end quote. But he made a note that Elijah McClain was unarmed. As a side note, the only reason why Elijah McClain was wearing a ski mask is because Elijah McClain is anemic, and this was November in Colorado. So to a normal person, November in Colorado is pretty cold, but to an anemic person, it will feel like they're freezing. 3 officers showed up to the scene: Randy Rodema, Jason Rosenblatt, and Nathan Woodyard, and all 3 of them claimed that their body cameras were knocked off during a struggle with little Elijah McClain. The officers started shouting orders at Elijah McClain, but he couldn't hear the officers' commands because he had on headphones. He was thrown to the ground and then held down by these officers with his hands cuffed behind his back. Paramedics showed up and administered ketamine to Elijah McClain in order to sedate him. Mind you, Elijah McClain is a skinny man, and they gave him a lethal dose of ketamine, which sent him into cardiac arrest. Elijah McClain was taken to the hospital. 3 days later, he was declared brain dead. Elijah McClain died. On August 27, 2019, Officer Levi Huffing hogtied a black woman with her hands and ankles behind her back. For almost 20 minutes, that woman cried out for help because she fell off the back seat of his cruiser in an inverted and very uncomfortable position. Officer Huffing was fired. He tried to appeal that firing, but didn't get his job back. On August 10, 2020, Officer Robert Rosen went to the King Soopers supermarket in order to assist another officer who was arresting a man who was allegedly trespassing. Apparently, Officer Rosen went berserk and started punching the man in the ribs and then tased this man more than 5 consecutive times. Rosen claimed that this was justified because the man was, quote, passively resisting, end quote, by lying on the floor, covering his arms to protect himself from the man who was punching him and tasing him repeatedly. As a result of this, Officer Rosen was fired on February 11th, 2021 for unsatisfactory performance, misuse of a taser, excessive use of force, and failure to operate a body-worn camera. Back in 2020, Brittany Gilliam and her children were having a, quote, Sunday fun day, end quote, just getting their hair and nails done, just going out having a little bit of fun. But then the Aurora Police Department noticed them. There were officers who believed that Gilliam and her children were in a stolen car, which was not true. Instead of doing some fine detective work and doing some research to find out that this was not a stolen car, the officers instead decided to get Brittany Gilliam and her children out of the car, made them lie down face first in pavement, and held her and her children at gunpoint.
It all started on what they called a Sunday fun day to get nails done and some ice cream. But things suddenly changed when Aurora police mistakenly thought they were in a stolen car. The video of the children face down held at gunpoint went viral. Police had the right license number, but it was for a motorcycle with Montana plates, not Brittany Gilliam's car.
That's not a mistake. That's a choice that you made. At any point in time, you could have changed the route that it was going.
And now we have the most recent incident with John Hubbard, who was the Aurora police officer who in July of 2021, just last month, as of the recording of this video, detained an unarmed man and then pistol whipped him at least 7 times and then would go on to choke that man for 39 seconds.
Aurora officers John Halbert and Francine Martinez responding to a trespassing call, attempting to arrest 29-year-old Kyle Vinson and 2 other adult men. Authorities say all 3 had warrants out for their arrest, but the scene quickly escalated. Halbert drawing his weapon.
Hands all the way out in front of you.
Moments later, he has his gun to Vinson's head.
Dude, you have a gun pointed straight at your head.
I don't have a gun.
Police say Halbert then hit Vinson in the head with his gun 13 times.
Get on your face.
The officer then pushing down on Vinson's neck.
You move, I will shoot you. Do not move. I didn't do anything.
Vinson ultimately arrested and taken to the hospital where he required 6 stitches.
Well, it's like my grandma said, when you lie down with pigs, you're gonna get dirty. And that couldn't be more true for Francine Martinez, who was the other officer watching John Halbert assault the citizen. So they were both arrested. Both John Halbert and Francine Martinez face multiple charges that consist of multiple felonies. Oh, I love the smell of fresh bacon in the morning. But what do I know? I'm just the devil in the details. Whew, that video was long, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Hit the like button, hit the share button. Let me know what you think in the comments. What do you think of the Aurora Police Department? I think that they are trash. Anyways, guys, that's it for me today. DA 1312, all cops are bastards. Horns up. Peace out.